Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Purdy. So in this week's folder, in this week's video, I'll just be talking really about awkward sentence construction, wordiness, appropriate, excuse me, and precise words. If you look in this folder, awkward sentence construction folder, you'll find the notes or the PowerPoint, number 1. And hopefully you've looked over this. Let's just review it quickly. Alright, so these are awkward and wordy sentences. The student who is present every day in class receives a cookie. The student that is present in class every day in class receives a cookie, and John Watson, who is present in class every day, receives a cookie. This is basically talking about the proper use of that, who, and which. So who always refers to a person. You never refer to a person as that or which. Okay, so a student, referring to a student as that is incorrect. Okay, students are whose, people are whose. Objects and animals, even if they are part of your family, I know we've got animal lovers out there, are still that's or whiches. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb. Who is a person, that, and which is a thing or an animal. So the next step is to determine when do I use that and which. Well, when we talked about comma usage, we talked about essential elements and non-essential elements. A non-essential element is something, like in this sentence, that is offset with commas. So it can be an interrupter like John Watson, however, received a cookie. In this case, the interrupter is a relative clause or a subordinate clause. Remember, this is a dependent clause. Dependent and subordinate means the same thing. This is a dependent clause that starts with a relative pronoun. That is the other type of dependent clause, and this is an example of that. We know that this is non-essential to the basic sentence. This is a dependent clause. Your independent clause is John Watson receives a cookie. Okay? Is it necessary to know that he's in class every day to understand that he received a cookie? No. The student who is present every day in class receives a cookie. This is another example of the same clause, who is present every day in class, but in this case we need to know why the student receives a cookie. So it is essential. It is a criteria for receiving a cookie. So this is an essential element, and as such it is not offset with commas. Okay, so that's essential versus non-essential. Now let's talk about which one you use for whether you use that or which. So the group is, in this case, considered a thing. It's not considered necessarily a group of people. So we are describing the group with the clause that arrived first. Okay, so the essential clause is the group will receive a free dinner. That's the main clause, the independent clause. This that arrived first is a dependent clause, or what we call a relative clause, because it starts with the relative pronoun that, and that's the subject, and arrived is the verb. In this case, it is, like all relative pronouns, it is acting as an adjective, and it's describing the group. Well, this is necessary because it is criteria for receiving the dinner. So that arrived first is a criteria for receiving the dinner. So this is an essential clause. Two things that make this an essential clause, or two ways that we make note of an essential clause, is number one, we use the pronoun that. We use the relative pronoun that. If we have a dependent clause, or it's also known as a relative clause if it starts with a relative pronoun, if we have one that is essential, we use that. We do not use which. Also, we know that it's essential because it's not offset with commas. Okay? So if you see a clause that starts with that arrived first, it should not be offset with commas, because by choosing the word that, you're saying that it is essential. Okay? Now, if it is non-essential, the purple group will receive a dinner. Apparently, there is no other criteria than being a purple group. So it's not necessary for us to know that it arrived first. This which arrived first is also a relative pronoun or a relative clause or a dependent clause that starts with a relative pronoun. And because it is not essential or a criteria for receiving a free dinner, this is non-essential information, and we offset it with commas. So, once again, that is for essential relative clauses or dependent clauses. We do not use commas because it's essential. Which is used for non-essential clauses, dependent clauses. And in that case, since it's non-essential, we must offset it with commas. So that's kind of a combination of comma rules and when to use that or which. All right, but that's kind of an aside. Awkward sentences or tangled grammar. So this is combining or using phrases and clauses in awkward ways. Here's your example. For most drivers who have a blood alcohol content of 0.5%, double their risk of an accident. Well, what's wrong with that? First of all, it doesn't have a subject. For most drivers is a prepositional phrase. Who have a blood alcohol content of 0.5%. This is a relative clause starting with who, have. Okay, it's a relative clause. It's a dependent clause. It cannot stand by itself. Okay. Double their risk of causing an accident is the verb. So we've got our main clause is something double their risk of causing an accident. We're missing a subject. Okay? So here's one way to correct it. Most drivers, add a subject, who have a blood alcohol content of 5% double their risk of causing an accident. So your essential clause or your main clause is most drivers double their risk of causing an accident. Now, you'll notice who have a blood alcohol content of 0.05%. Is it necessary to clarify what drivers double their risk? Yes, because not all drivers do this. So this is an essential clause. It is not offset with commas. Okay? Another way to do this is to keep the prepositional phrase and the dependent clause, but make this an independent clause. For most drivers who have a blood alcohol content of 0.5%, their risk of causing an accident is doubled. Okay? Subject is risk is doubled. All right? So that's one way to correct tangled grammar. Another example, when the country elects a president is the most important responsibility in a democracy. This is trying to use the dependent clause when the country elects a president as the subject. Can't do that. The only type of dependent clause that we can use as a subject is what we call a noun clause, and this is not a noun clause. When indicates that this is an adverb clause. It's answering an adverb question. Okay, so this is a clause. It cannot be the subject of this sentence. Is the most important responsibility in a democracy. All right, so we need to add a subject. Citizens' election of a president is, so we've added citizens' election of a president as our subject, is the most important responsibility in a democracy. This is a subject. Now, although the United States is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, this is a dependent clause. And if we remember, if a dependent clause comes before an independent clause, more than 12 million of our children live in poverty. This is sentence pattern DC, comma, IC. Well, you'll see here they have attached the dependent clause to the independent clause using comma but or comma coordinating conjunction. That's not necessary. That's when you're joining two independent clauses. This is a dependent clause. This is an independent clause, so we just need a comma. It's sentence pattern DC, comma, IC. Here's it corrected. Although the United States is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, more than 12 million of our children live in poverty. All right, moving on. We decided that there's also awkward sentences that simply are not logical, and here's why. We decided that Tiffany's welfare would not be safe living with her mother. Well, welfare People can be safe or unsafe. Welfare cannot be safe. Okay, so they're saying that her welfare would not be safe. What they meant was we decided that Tiffany would not be safe living with her mother. Okay, Tiffany's welfare would not be safe. All right, so under the revised plan, the elderly who now receive a double personal exemption will be abolished. In this case, this is essentially describing the elderly, and it's stating this who now receive a double personal exemption. That is describing the elderly. But the essential or main clause is the elderly will be abolished. Clearly, we don't intend to abolish the elderly. We intend to abolish the double personal exemption. So here's the revision. Under the revised plan, the double personal exemption currently received by the elderly will be abolished. That makes sense. All right, so redundancies. Daniel is now employed at a private rehabilitation center working as a registered physical therapist. If he is employed, it is understood that he is working. That is redundant. Repetition. Sylvia very hurriedly scribbled her name, address, and phone number on a greasy napkin. If we use the appropriate descriptive verb, we should not need adverbs, in my humble opinion. But in this case, scribbled, the word scribbled by its very nature implies that it was very hastily, very quickly written. So very hurriedly is repetition. It's repetitive. It should simply be Sylvia scribbled her name, address, and phone number on a greasy napkin. That implies that she wrote very quickly and probably somewhat sloppily. Let me go back. Our fifth patient in room 6 is a mentally ill patient. That's very clearly and obviously repetition. So our fifth patient in room 6 is mentally ill. Empty phrases such as, in my opinion, at this point in time, our current immigration system policy is misguided. If this is your position on an essay, we don't have to know it's your opinion. You should state it as your position and then support it with details. At this point in time, if you felt the need to reference any point in time and it was current, the easier way to say this would be now or currently. But if you are applying for a job, as it appears this case, this appears to be a cover letter for a resume, my skills and experience are perfect for the assistant manager position. You don't need to specify at this point in time. It's assumed. All right, fillers. Sorry, I'm getting a little clicky. Fillers is when, where, there is, or there are, is because. These are empty fillers. They add nothing to the sentence. And when we were talking about sentence structure, I think it was subject-verb agreement, and we went over one of the subject-verb agreement rules. There is or are, and here is or are. There and here in that case is not even a subject. It's called an expletive. Remember, the subject was bumped to a place behind the verb. This is very weak sentence construction. All right, it should not be used. So the reason the experiment failed is because conditions in the lab were not sterile. The best way to restate that would be because the conditions were not sterile, the experiment failed, or the experiment failed because the lab conditions were not sterile. Anorexia nervosa is where, that's filler, sufferers of anorexia nervosa believe they are too fat. Okay, so avoid these phrases, is where, or the reason is, or is because. Long lead ends. This email message is to inform you that we will not meet on Friday. We will not meet on Friday is succinct and avoids all this nonsense. I am writing this paper to show how my job change was the most difficult time in my life. And I saw this in some of the essays where you would introduce your second reason by saying, now I'm going to discuss how gun laws would reduce the overall death rate. Don't tell me or announce that you're going to give me another reason. Simply give me another reason. In my example, gun control legislation will reduce the number of deaths overall. All right, you don't need the I am writing to tell, or next I will tell you about. Just do it. Okay. creating strong verbs. Let's skip this. I'm sorry. We're not going to skip this. So, this example, there are many lessons regarding judging and accepting others as they are that are taught to one who might read this story. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but basically, to one who might read this story, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. Here's how I would do this. I'd say there are many lessons regarding judging and accepting others. What does judging and accepting others? What's another word for that? I'd say another word for that is tolerance. Okay? Tolerance. And there are many lessons. So lessons is a key point. So is tolerance. Judging and accepting others as they are is tolerance. That are taught to one whom might read this story. Really a much better way to say this would be this story teaches many lessons of tolerance, or teaches lessons of tolerance. And here is another example. The story teaches many lessons regarding judging and accepting others. I would pose that judging and accepting others is can be shortened even further to tolerance. Okay? Before this novel, I'd never felt my way of thinking be influenced by a work of fiction. Well, this is redundant. Novel and a work of fiction are the same thing, so you can choose either one of the other. I had never felt my way of thinking to be influenced. To be influenced, I presume that your way of thinking has been changed, so we can condense be influenced to changed, and rewrite this as, this novel has influenced my way of thinking, or has changed my way of thinking. I think if we use changed my way of thinking, might even probably be more specific. All right. The reason why I bring up this data is because not only can guns cause someone their life. First of all, I think it's supposed to be cost someone their life, and the appropriate form, the appropriate possessive pronoun to describe whose life it is THEIR, so we have some basic errors in here, but also can any other weapon. So clearly, guns and other weapons can be combined or treated together. We do not need the reason why. That's a filler. Okay? And we've got some just basic errors there. Other weapons, in addition to guns, can cost someone his or her life. All right? That's a very succinct, to the point way to do that. Eliminate announcements, create strong verbs, and add detail. The problem for me at my workplace is people who are not trained properly. A way to say this would be, people at my workplace are not trained properly. You don't need to announce it's a problem, just identify the problem. Another example of the way our workplace problems can be solved is scheduling. Management could also address scheduling to improve workplace problems. Okay? And the reason why people want to get college degrees is for money. The reason why is filler. It's an announcement. People want college degrees because they believe it will help them earn more money. All right. Condensed clauses and phrases. So, another word to revise awkward and wordy sentences is, we took a side trip to Monticello, which is an independent clause. We is your subject took. All right? Now, which was the home of Thomas Jefferson is a relative clause, in this case describing Monticello. But do we need a clause for this, or can we combine it into a phrase? In this case, using a positive phrase. We took a side trip to Monticello, comma, the home of Thomas Jefferson. Okay, this is what we call a positive, because we've identified Monticello, and now we are identifying it again. Okay, it's called a positive, and as you can see, as with unnecessary elements, because appositives are, by virtue of the fact that they are stating the same thing twice, are unnecessary elements, we offset with a comma. All right? This is a very wordy, kind of crazy sentence. Being able to succeed in a subject that I thought I would never grasp just shows me that if I'm willing to focus on obtaining my goals and standards that I set for myself, I will succeed in anything that I want to do in life as long as I set my mind to it. That's a mouthful. So let's condense it, but make sure it has the same meaning. Succeeding in a difficult subject taught me that focus and determination helps me achieve my goals. Okay? All right, so also avoid informal word choice. I didn't ever want to go to college, at least when I graduated high school, but then I decided, hey, it would help me to get a job. So anyway, now I'm working on my degree. Okay, I decided, hey, that is informal. So anyway, that's informal. Okay, but then I decided it would help me to get a job. So now I'm working on my degree. That would be the proper way to rewrite that. Cliches, which don't add anything to the sentence. And there she was, plain as day, sitting in the doghouse where we'd left her. Okay, plain as day is not necessary. Misused or confused. I knew him better than the other guy. This sentence is comparing how well you knew one to how well you knew the other. The comparative form of then is THAN. I knew him better than THAN, the other guy. I like Diet Coke better than THAN, sweet tea. If we're comparing two things, it's than. Then, this is actually a time transition, usually. Okay, a time. First, I chopped the onion, then I sautéed it in the pan. This is usually a time transition. I wish she would just accept the truth. This form of the word accept, although it's pronounced the same, there's really no way to tell the difference, this is the root word of exception, okay, or to make an exception. So if I accept someone from the assignment, I make an exception. They don't have to do it. Clearly, that is not the case. When we agree to something, we accept it, and that is spelled ACCEPT. Okay, and that is in one of those commonly misused words back in L1, 2, 3, or 4. Can't remember exactly what the reference pages were in the back. Just acquiring to walk, she really craved to ascend those stairs. Acquiring to walk. Acquire means to get something or to possess, or to obtain. Okay, we don't really acquire a walk. We acquire material things. We acquire knowledge. We don't acquire to walk. So just learning to walk, comma, she really craved, I don't know, I suppose you could crave to walk up those stairs, but that's kind of an overstatement. She really wanted to ascent, would mean go up, but this is the noun form. It should be ascend, ASCEND. All right, so be careful. All right. This is sentence variety, including or to encourage sentence variety. One way to do that is to open up, rather than subject, verb, which is the typical sentence pattern we kind of get into when we are writing. But that's repetitive. That pattern gets kind of boring. So to add some variety to your sentences, one way to do this is open it up with an ly word, which is an adverb. So in this case, they changed a few dewdrops eventually fell from the window to eventually, comma, a few dewdrops fell from the window. So start it with an adverb, or if you can't remember that it's called an adverb, just with an ly word. Excitedly, comma, I dialed the number to claim my prize. Okay, rather than I dialed the number excitedly to claim. I excitedly dialed the number to claim my prize. All right, it just adds a little variety. Another way is to to switch clauses around. A pair of black ducks flew over the pond just as the sun was rising. Just as the sun was rising is a dependent clause. And so instead of using I see DC sentence pattern, use DC, comma, I see. Just as the sun was rising, a pair of black ducks flew over the pond. Here's another example. John and I anticipated a peaceful evening. We sat down at the campfire to brew a cup. They have made this into what we call a participial phrase. In other words, a participial form of a verb is an ing verb, and this is being used as an adverb in this case. So I know that I've said before verbs that end in ing are called gerunds. And yes, verbs that end in ing are called gerunds, spelled G-E-R-U-N-D-S, when they're used as nouns. When you've got an ing verb that's used as an adjective or an adverb, then it is called a participial phrase. In this case, this is a participial phrase. So make that a participial phrase. Anticipating a peaceful evening, John and I sat down at the campfire to brew a cup of coffee. Okay? Revise, revise, and revised. Combined sentences, in other words, subordinate or coordinate. School was difficult for me. I hated history. I hated memorizing facts. Learning the state capitals was the worst experience of my life. This is all very choppy, simple sentences. Simple sentence, simple sentence, simple sentence. So, in this case, make one of these clauses a dependent clause, or what's called the process of subordination. Remember, subordinate clauses are also called, dependent clauses are also called subordinate clauses. So the process of subordination just means I'm making a dependent clause out of something, out of what was formerly an independent clause. So, because I hated memorizing facts, learning the state capitals was the worst experience of my life. Okay? In this case, we just talked about gerunds. Learning the state capitals is a gerund. It's a verb that ends in ing, but in this case, it's acting as the subject of this clause. That's why it's a gerund, and that's how it's different from a participial phrase. Okay? The next example is the teacher used to clang her coffee mug to get students' attention. She always kicked the inside of her desk. Her voice was high and nasally. Once again, 3 very short, choppy sentences. This is subordination and coordination. So, when she didn't speak in her high nasally voice, comma, this is a subordinate or dependent conjunction, dependent clause. Our teacher used to clang her coffee mug or kick the inside of her desk to get our attention. They simply have made this compound verb. Our teacher used to clang or kick. It's a compound verb there. All right, and that's how to revise that as well. All right, so your assignment. If you wish to go back to this week's folder and look at the exercises, here's some practice exercises before you do 8 through 15. Okay? By the way, we just did 1 through 7 on our PowerPoint. So 8 through 15 is the assignment that's due on Thursday. So this is the same example that we used in the PowerPoint. It simply explains it step by step. Okay, this is the other example used in the PowerPoint. All right, so here's an example that's not in the PowerPoint. Occasionally, a mixed construction is so dangled that it defies grammatical analysis. When this happens, back away from the sentence, rethink what you want to say, then simply rewrite it. In the whole word method, that's a method of teaching reading. In the whole word method, children learn to recognize entire words rather than by the phonics method in which they learn to sound out letters and groups of letters. Basically, they're contrasting the two methods of teaching children to read, the whole word method and the phonics method. So say that. The whole word method teaches children to recognize entire words. That's an independent clause, semicolon. The phonics method teaches them to sound out letters and groups of letters. So sometimes you just have to scrap it and start over. Okay? English does not allow double subjects, nor does it allow an object or an adverb to be repeated in an adjective clause. Unlike some other languages, English does not allow a noun and a pronoun to be repeated in a sentence. Okay, so my father, he moved to Peru before he met my mother. We cannot say, my father, he moved to Peru. That's a double subject. It should say, my father moved to Peru before he met my mother. The final exam, I should really study for it to pass the course. This is double. I can't think of what I want to say. Double direct objects. I should really study. Double objects of the preposition for it. It is the object of the preposition. It is the final exam. Just eliminate the preposition or the pronoun it. All right. Make sure that your logical connections are straight. We've looked at that example in our PowerPoint. And a positive, as I said, is a noun that renames a nearby noun. Usually it's right after it. When an appositive and the noun is it renames are not logically equivalent, the error is known as faulty opposition. Okay, so the tax accountant, comma, a very lucrative profession, comma, requires intelligence, patience, and attention to mathematical detail. Well, in the original sentence it said the tax accountant, and we are the appositive offset by commas because it's non-essential. A very lucrative profession. An accountant is not a profession. So, tax accounting is a profession. So, we have to make sure that those are logically equivalent. All right, that they are the same thing. We've talked about avoiding is when, is where, the reason is. All right. If you want to practice these, let's go ahead and do that. Revisions of lettered sentences appear in the back of the book. All right, so let's look at the unlettered sentence. You can look at these and check them in the back of the book. Actually, I'm sorry, you don't have this book. So let's go ahead and do this. Using surgical gloves is a precaution now worn. A precaution is not worn. Okay? We don't wear precautions. We take precautions. So, how about now taken? Using surgical gloves is a precaution now taken by dentists to prevent contact with patients' blood and saliva. So this is a logical problem. We don't wear precautions, we take precautions. Okay. A physician, the career my brother is pursuing, requires at least 10 years of challenging work. This is in a positive, a physician, and immediately after it we are renaming physician, but this is the problem we ran into up above, which is faulty opposition. A physician is not a career. A physician is a person. Okay, so we would have to either change a physician to medicine, comma, the career my brother is pursuing requires at least 10 years of challenging work. That's the way I would suggest it. So medicine is a career. The reason the pharaohs had bad teeth was because tiny particles of sand found their way into Egyptian bread. The reason is not necessary. Go ahead and just state the pharaohs had bad teeth because tiny particles of sand found their way into Egyptian bread. Recurring bouts of flu among team members set a record for the number of games forfeited. Okay, so recurring bouts of flu, or recurring bouts is your subject here. Of flu is a prepositional phrase. Among team members is a prepositional phrase. So recurring bouts set a record. Well, recurring bouts don't set records. The record was a number of games forfeited. So here's how I would suggest doing that. Recurring bouts of flu among team members caused a record number of games to be forfeited. Okay? And in this box contains a key to your future. in this box contains, well, boxes contain things, so this is redundant. You could say in this box is the key to your future, or this box contains the key to your future. If you put something in a box, you are containing it, so this is redundant. Early diagnosis of prostate cancer is often curable. We do not cure early diagnoses. Early diagnoses lead to cures. So one way to do these is early diagnosis of prostate cancer. Early diagnosis of prostate cancer makes it more often curable. Okay, or prostate cancer, which is diagnosed early, is often curable. You could change it either way. Depending on our method of travel and our destination determines how many suitcases we are allowed to pack. Depending on our method of travel and our destination, this is a I can't think of that word. It's a participial phrase. Depending upon our method of travel and our destination, this cannot be the subject of the sentence. Determines how many suitcases we're allowed to pack. So determines is your verb. What determines? Our method of travel and our destination determines how many suitcases we're allowed to pack. Putting depending upon that makes that a participial phrase, and you can't use a participial phrase as a subject. Dyslexia is where people have a learning disorder that impairs reading ability. People with dyslexia have a learning disorder that impairs reading ability. Okay? Eliminate the is where. Even though Ellen had heard French spoken all her life, yet she could not speak it. This is sentence construction problem. Even though Ellen had heard French spoken all her life is a dependent clause. She could not speak it is an independent clause. We do not join a dependent clause to an independent clause with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. We eliminate the coordinating conjunction. Even though Ellen had heard French spoken all her life, comma, she could not speak it. This is sentence pattern DC, comma, IC. In understanding artificial intelligence, code is a critical skill for computer game designers. I don't really know what the problem with this is, but I would say understanding artificial intelligence code is a critical skill for computer game designers. So, your next step, redundancies, we have looked at this. We've looked at that in the PowerPoint. Okay. Gabriel Machino's film The Pursuit of Happiness tells the story of a single father determined in his mind. Well, if we are determined, it contains the fact that you have made up your mind to do something. So this is redundant. Okay? Unnecessary repetition of words. We have done this one. Let's look at this example. The best teachers help each student become a better student. Well, clearly, student is redundant. So we replace that with simply help each student grow. We've talked about this. We talked about empty phrases and inflated phrases. Along the lines of can be restated as like I want a dress a wedding dress along the lines of Princess Kate's. That's a lot of words to say the same thing. I want a dress like Princess Kate's. As a matter of fact, can be restated. In fact, at all times, I keep my purse beside me at all times. I keep my purse beside me always, or I always keep my purse beside me. At the present time is now or currently, or if it's implied, given the situation, the rhetorical situation, that it is present time, you don't need it at all. Same thing at this point in time, because of the fact that, just get rid of it. Because. Okay? Actually, you are combining, in this case, three dependent markers or three subordinate conjunctions. Because, the fact that, and, well, because and the fact that. You're combining two of those. All right. Look at these inflated and replace those with the concise versions. Okay? We talked about this. Simplify the sentence structure. The financial analyst claimed that because of volatile market conditions, she could not make an estimate of the company's future profits. She could not make an estimate of, this can be combined, she could not estimate the company's future profits. All right. And you can go ahead and look over these. But this all should be fairly self-explanatory. So you're going to go back, and what you need to do for Thursday is this group of sentences. Rewriting awkward, mixed, awkward or wordy constructions right here. Rewriting awkward mixed construction and words, mixed instructions and word sentences. I don't know what that means. I'm going to have to rewrite that myself. That's awkward. We have done 1 through 7. For the quiz, you are going to do 8 through 15. Now, somebody asked me, do you want us to type this as a Word document and submit it to the Dropbox, which is right here? This is your final. Actually, awkward sentence. Where's my Dropbox here? So as you see, the Dropbox for rewriting awkward mixed construction and word sentences, again, that's equally awkward. I'll have to change that. You're going to do 8 through 15. Now remember, you find the sentences back in the awkward folder, and it is number 3. All right, so you take this out, do 8 through 15 on here. You can either do it in the Dropbox itself, or you can do it on a Word document and submit it to the Dropbox. But the Dropbox is right in the Week 7 folder, right here. All right? You can either do it in the message section, or you can do it as an attachment. All right? So I hope that clears things up. I think that's all I have for today.